What does it take to create something that never existed before? What does it take to challenge the status quo? What does it take to change the world? This is the Swell podcast. We're passionate about the seed of an idea and how it swells into a movement. Take a journey with us as we seek the answers to those three questions through the stories of thought leaders, world builders, game changers, disruptors, and other pleasantly rebellious humans who've ventured out into the unknown on a personal journey to do something novel, innovative, creative, or disruptive. In today's episode, we chat with DJ Dolph, who is one of the most in-demand DJs in the high-end market for corporate, private, and special events. He's DJ'd at events like Pluralsight Live, Domopolooza, Silicon Slope, Sundance, and countless others. He's opened shows for Ciara, Boyz II Men, Lil Jon, Weezer, Zara Larsson, and way more. We chat with Randolph about his perspective on the experience of music, his ability to read an audience, and ultimately the necessary in-the-moment act of creation that is DJing to facilitate that unforgettable experience of live music. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, sign up to our newsletter at theswellpod.com, and get in on the conversation through all of the major socials at theswellpod. Our first season is made in partnership with Kiln. Kiln provides flex office space solutions for teams and individuals. Their all-inclusive set of amenities helps startups, creatives, and entrepreneurs alike get work done. Learn more about Kiln at kiln.co. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy.
We'll get into it. So whenever you guys are ready.
well, let's just jump into it right there, I think, because I love what you were talking about, and even specific. Oh yeah, we're recording.
Oh, we didn't even start.
So we haven't started, but we'll.
Okay, we can go back. We can go back. Do you want to kick us off?
Well, welcome to the Swell podcast, Randolph, and this is DJ Dolph.
Thank you,
DJ Dolph, and
do people when I was thinking about this on the drive over here. Like, do people usually say like things like, well, when you're doing your sets, DJ Dolph is in the house? Like, is that what you get
funny.
A lot?
I think people get my name wrong more than right.
Yeah.
And to be factual, there's a lot of people that grew with me through my process of becoming an entertainer. So they call me DJ Randolph. Some people call me DJ Rolf. I've DJ'd for them for years, flown all over the world for them, and they just call me that. And I'm like, all right, it is what it is. Or like I have people that spell my name wrong. So there's a gamut of people getting it right, getting it wrong. But there's nothing wrong with it if it's in a positive way.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with a name if it's positive. It's when you start getting into the nuances of like, I like this name because it's me. And it's like, no, you can't like really identify yourself like by anything because we don't really know anyway. So.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to have you. And
sure.
I think back to one of the experiences that you designed and played at, which was Pluralsight Live.
Yeah.
We were both there, weren't we?
That's where we first experienced what it means to be on the dance floor, right? With you mixing it up.
So I got a question for you guys before you guys like kind of jump into me. So we met through the experience of a party for Pluralsight Live, and that was the last year, so not 2020s, but the year previous, and that was the first experience you guys have ever had with me, which is incredible that we're here today through that experience, and that's how far music takes people. But it's like, what drew you to say, I'm fascinated now. I need to know more. What is that? What's that moment? What's that like? How does that happen? Where's the magic?
I love that. I think you're the first to have asked a question to us at the start of the podcast, which is awesome. And let me answer first. I think, what made it memorable back then? Because it's about just being able to remember things. Yeah. Experiences are so important to just be able to remember. And I remember the feeling of that night. I can still transport myself right back to it. And it was a great event, of course, but the music set the tone so beautifully. And I was impressed actually by just how the music constantly changed. But you didn't really barely notice. Mm-hmm. But your body noticed because your body just kept on at the same rhythm, and it was just a great seamless musical fest that night. And so I remembered it for that reason, and I needed to talk to you that night, and I did talk to you.
Yeah, we did.
And just knew that our paths would cross at some point in the future. And I think the answer maybe you'd be also giving, I don't know, Josh, around why on the Swell podcast. I think it was just around the ability to be able to, I don't know, do a few things like read audiences and I don't know what
well, yeah.
What you say?
So I'll also say, going back to that night, right? There was definitely, the emotional connection, I think, is kind of, there's a memorability to it. There's a feeling to it. And I think that's kind of what sticks in our mind from that evening, right? But also, this guy's just an incredible break dancer. And anytime he gets a chance, he'll usually try to whip out a windmill or something. I think you did the worm that night. I can't remember.
I think it might have been the windmill, but
it might have been the
windmill. I don't know if I could walk for a few weeks afterwards, because that was from the 80s. My breakdancing skills,
Well, I think the incredibleness of the night, and I appreciate you guys forming this relationship with me through the music, and I'm happy we're here today and we're able to rediscover some of those moments and other things. And it's so crazy because for that moment for me, I was like opening for Weezer and then coming on after Weezer. I've opened for a lot of people and they brought it so hard that night, and I was like, I have to go back on after these guys. Like, that's the only thing that was going through my brain that entire set. Like, they did such a good job that I got to bring it even harder than they brought it. Because they were worried, like, the room was, like, going to die off after. And, like, the people who were running the event came an hour later, and they're like, this is crazy. It's going crazy. Let's keep going. And it was a whole different vibe other than what they had anticipated. So it's incredible to hear your emotions compared to my emotions at the time. Because I was like sitting there side stage. I remember them coming on. I was like, all right, I set the tempo. Here they come on, hammering anthems. And like, it's different when a band comes on and they're good, but it's different when an anthem comes on and the crowd is like, they're interjecting, and it's a whole call and response is happening. There's a whole different system of oh man, this is not just a party anymore. I'm a part of just like you said, this huge experience, and I have to elevate myself. So you caught me at a really good time as well, because I feel like I play at a pretty high level consistently. But there are moments where you have to turn on the machine. Even harder than you thought you could. And that was one of those moments for me. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think, so it's interesting because even to go back to why I think, why this moment right now that we felt like it was a good idea to bring you onto the podcast, right? Because that was an impactful moment, and there was definitely this build up throughout the night, right? Which I think you explained through your experience. And when we think about what we're trying to do with this podcast is, we're definitely interested in what it takes to create something new, right? But, we have such a diverse group of people that we've had on the podcast so far. But when we think about specifically you, there's an entire experience in that, right? And we kind of talked about this for a moment before the podcast, right? But, it's so interesting what you do, because I think as far as how you take change, it's so in the moment, right? It's so in the moment to the point what you were just about to say is you have to read the room and you have to change, as you're reading the room, and you're constantly making those changes. But then on a music level, right? You're taking, you're obviously reading the audience. You're trying to give them the music that is probably going to get them to an emotional state that's going to have them jumping, have them bouncing or whatever, right? But, the idea of what you're doing when you start to curate all the music, you create it and mash it together, put it together, all of a sudden you're creating this unique experience that is unique to you, right? Mm-hmm. It's what you bring to these events. And there's definitely parallels that we see in what you're doing. You're doing it in the moment, whereas entrepreneurs or other people are doing it, whether they've done it in the past or they're doing it right now, but it's a long-term big disruption or change. But you're doing it so specifically in every single moment that you're doing your set, which is interesting.
And I'm happy that you touched on that specifically, because I speak about this all the time. I'm on a conversation after I leave the event yesterday, and I go through the process of people don't realize what's happening in my head technically when I'm doing the job. You see instantaneous like moves. It's like I'm on offense and defense at the same time, and everything's happening. But when you start doing these big corporate events, it's then magnified by like 100 times because I'm getting communication in my ear at the same time as well. So somebody's telling me like, oh, these 12 things are happening, and I'm also listening to, so 3 things are happening. So master mix is happening, what you're hearing. I'm mixing the song, so I'm making that happen, and then somebody else is telling me what to do. You know, so there's 3 things happening all simultaneously. So when you're saying, in fact, in the moment, I'm making key decisions and I'm reading, there's so much going on constantly that you have to not be afraid. The rule of anything is like, you start off with raw talent and then you polish it up. And then once you polish it up, then you know not to be afraid because you've walked through all the things that could have happened necessarily. So experience then, you know, becomes the biggest part of your gift in that, you know. And so when you're saying the thread is like, oh, in this instantaneous moment, but my moment right there impacts 10, 20 years of my whole career. Like one thing I could do, you know, at an event could change my life 10 years down the road. I can't even see it yet. And that has happened this whole journey. So from the beginning of my story to where I'm at, it's like I did something for someone 8 years ago at a restaurant. And then I'll get a call from like, oh, I'm the vice president of eBay. I'd like you to come do this thing because I heard you. And it's like, that was like a random like Tuesday night that I was like, just like in my own world. But when you speak to people through that and you can, you know, do it on the fly, and then you're not just telling their story and my story, you're creating the story. So now we have this story that we all share together, you know, and that's the thing that's happening in that split second. It's, how do we change the story? Because you're having a conversation with him, you're dancing. So many things are happening. So to cut through takes a lot.
Yeah. That's beautiful, I think, right? And I have so many questions about that. Like, you know, is that unique to music and that experience? Like, there's you mentioned writers and even storytellers. I think it's kind of similar to that point as well. But I don't know. I'm interested in, you know, because on your journey, right, you've had huge moments where you've opened for massive bands. You played for massive organizations, you know, and it's pretty incredible. So like, maybe take us back to what started it all. Yeah, like how did you get started on this journey? So
crazy. So I, like, high school kid, everything like on the path of what your parents are putting you on. Like, my dad's in accounting, my family's a huge finance family, so I started college accounting courses when I was in high school. So I was like one of those kids that are like, oh, we get the summer packet for your accounting, and so you have to finish it before you have to turn it in like after summer. I would do it the first weekend and be done with it because I didn't want to do anything but hang out with my friends or do whatever. But with that obsession, and then I started working for my family, and I would be in the office and I would just listen to albums all day. And I'm like 18, 19, trying to go to college, but I would just listen to music all day, like all day long. From Tool to like anything in music, I would just discover something. And then I'd be like, okay, this is what I want to learn about right now. That's what I'm into. Now I want to learn about rock and roll. Now I want to learn about jazz. It's just like always have been like my thing. And then so I used to throw parties when my parents would go out of town, and they'd hate me for it, but I do it every single time, no, without fail. You're leaving? Okay, you left me an allowance? I'm throwing a party. Like, don't leave town. Like, like, so I'd have my friends come over. My friend Chad would come over all the time, and then his cousin came over one day, and he's like, you have incredible taste in music. Ever heard of DJing? And I'm like, no, man, like, I'm going into finance. Like, my life is, like, already decided for me. Like, that's my, like, I was, like, ignoring him. Like, completely, like, he told me exactly my future. He literally told me. 2 years later, 20 years old, have a fake ID. I'm in the hookah bar, which is now Prohibition, I think, whatever's down by the mall.
Yeah.
I go there. He's like, man, you're in the club at 20 years old, and I'm trying to show you this DJing thing. I'm street teaming for Harry O's, which is now PC Live. So I'm like, okay, like, let me take you up on this for like 2 seconds. Go to his house. He shows me the instrument. I was like, oh my gosh, this is how it's done. I've had these mixes in my head forever. And I never knew that this instrument existed, that this is how you put the two together. From that day, went home, talked to my dad. I was like, hey, Dad, I need $300 to buy the software. He's like, why? And I was like, I want to do this music thing. And I was like, I also need like another $150 for a hard drive. He's like, and that's when hard drives were expensive. You know what I mean? It's like, what are you doing that you need this much space? I'm like, I think I have a project. I go to his house and he gives me a couple of DJ mixes, like from like DJs, in my opinion, that, you know, are true pioneers, because before you could like learn on YouTube, that's how we learned. You had to like go to the club, or you get a mixtape. That was the thing. So I was like, well, we're making a mixtape, duh. You know, so we get in the lab. 2 days later, I start splicing stuff together. I would take from other people, like literally, because I had no idea, but I knew exactly what we wanted to do. We went to a club like a week later, because he was already street teaming. And so we started off downtown, because they had like a baby club that we were trying to promote in Salt Lake. And so I was like, I'm going to manage you because I can't play the instrument yet. So I'm going to be your manager, because I knew all this business stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to start this business. Started the business instantaneously. That was it. Like, all decisions were made within a week. Within 3 months, I had moved out of my parents' house.
Really?
That was it. It was working immediately. I saw the vision. Within like the first 2 weeks, because we were handing out CDs, we got our first gigs. We were opening for this guy Brisk at the Mint, and it was like $150. And I was like, okay, $150, a couple times a week. This is good business, you know, and we're 20 years old, you know, so there's like, and I'm doing this illegally at this time.
Yeah.
So I get deeper in it, because I'm like, okay, there's more money here. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to be a promoter now. So now I'm like, I'm going to be a promoter only because one day we show up to the club promoter wasn't there, and they still opened the club. So the girl at the door is like, who do I give this money to? And I'm used to getting the $150 from the bar. She hands me $1,200. And I go, I'm on the wrong side of this business. Immediately, I'm like, I'm in this business now too, you know? So immediately we take over a promotional site. We start our own night. And that one club, it didn't really last, but I knew of this other place I used to go to all the time called Tony's. And so I called him. I was like, hey, Tony, I've been coming here. You know me from when I was a kid, but I want to do this thing. And he's like, sure, let's do it. $3 Patron Thursdays. And I started a night to the point where I was flying in DJs before I was 21.
No way.
Before I was 21 years old, I flew in at least 5, 6 DJs. And I got arrested 2 months before my 21st birthday, running a nightclub. So that was the journey. So then I sat down. My friend who I started this business with, I sat down. His mom picks me up, because the cops didn't arrest me. They're like, all right, you go home. You're going to have to deal with a lot of court stuff. This is bad. So I sat down there and I went to court. They gave me, it was illegal. I had international fake ID from Jamaica, because I'm a dual citizen. And my brother cured that for me at the time. So I had this fake ID. They're like, since 9/11, there's these huge rules against international fakes and all these things, and so you're in a lot of trouble. So I'm like, oh my gosh, like lawyered up super crazy for it. And then they basically gave me probation for it, and then I had to go to these alcohol classes, and I'm like, I wasn't even drinking, you know? So I'm like, well, I'm in these alcohol classes. And so this is divine intervention kicking in, right? I go to these alcohol classes, I'm sitting there, and I'm learning about drugs and all these things, and my brain hasn't even developed into 21.
Right.
So like my brain's like now telling me like this is God or somebody above just protected you and said you need to change direction. You like right now, no, like you can't drink. If you're watching your friends do drugs and all these things, don't do it. Don't participate. I'll drink and I'll dabble, like you smoke a little marijuana. Who doesn't? You know what I mean? And if you do, don't, whatever. Yeah. You know, like it has nothing to do with me. You're to each his own. But it made you realize like I can't be dabbling in like the lifestyle. The lifestyle is not where the future is for me. So at that point in time, I sat back, I started walking downtown. I looked at buildings downtown, and I looked at the places I saw myself. And I saw this place called Metropolitan. It was a high-end restaurant. I called them. I'm like, hey, do you guys have DJs? They're like, no, we're a fancy place. Like, we don't have DJs here. What are you talking about? And so basically what happens after that, the lady, I'm like trying to talk her into like booking me. And she's like, well, here's the deal. There's this thing called Twilight that's coming here to Utah. And it's going to be like 3 blocks away from me, this restaurant, because it's right across the street from the PF Chang's downtown, which is now Valters. So if you guys know where Valters is, that's where Metropolitan was. So it was like right by the park. So they're like, we'll try you out this one Thursday night. I'm like, all right, cool. So I bring my gear down there, and I'm like setting up, because by then I had taken a break from like going out and promoting, and I was like, all right, I need to like focus on the right direction, right? And so I bring the gear there. As I'm setting up this, I get in a fight with the owner.
No.
Like, she's like telling me where to set up. I'm like, no, you need to set up here because people got to see you. They're walking this way. I'm telling you need to do it this way. She's like, no, this is my business. What are you trying to tell me? Get out of here. You know, so I get in the car. I start driving home. She calls me. And she's like, I want you to come back. I don't want you to feel like I'm a hard person to deal with. I really want to make this work. I go back, I do the event. Miracle. Like, immediately it turns into something. On top of it, Vita Tequila, you guys are familiar with Lisa Barlow?
Yeah.
Well, Lisa Barlow was my sponsor for that night. And that all happened in like that first like inception of that first like month I was there. She came in, she was a customer there, and then she was like, you're my guy. So when she went to Park City to help open up Silver, that's where I went. I went straight to the top. Like, it was just like...
That's insane.
Yeah, it was like, all of a sudden I was like, royalty immediately. It's like, all of a sudden I'm in all the right hands. I'm being coddled by all the right people. And it's like, how is this happening? Of course I have to deliver. Now I'm like, okay, we're at the delivery stage now. It's like, let's now refocus. So now I'm 22 years old. Years later, music director of Silver, already at 22 years old. And then by 23, I'm already meeting all the most influential people in the world. And they're like taking me all over the world. And like, I'm like, oh, you want me to fly to Mexico? You want me to fly to Bahamas? You want me to fly to Canada? You want me to go to Greece? All right, I'm there. Like, that was it. It was like, I met all the wealthiest people within like the first couple years of my career, and it's just like exploded ever since. So you can't plan that, but I also had to see where I wanted to be. That was my vision. But to how it happened and what people walked into my life, I can't predict that. And so that's the continuous. So when you talk about the swell, and that's what we were talking about off camera before, it's like, and you're like, yeah, the concept of the podcast is the buildup of change. In my life, I can always tell because of my dreams. Like, I'll have this dream, like, I want this. And my dream, it'll torment me with this wave of like, I'm about to drown. And then all of a sudden, the big change happens and it's clear skies. And nothing happened. Like, I never drowned. I'm still here. And so it's important to know where you want to go from the beginning and then go through the swell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because people want the end result and they don't want the middle stuff that's like, okay, how am I going to put myself out there?
Yeah.
You know, because even me coming here is like kind of put myself out there. None of us need to do this, right? You know, so it's like to put ourselves in this position is like saying, I have a vision of the future and I would like it to happen in this way, but I'm going to make the effort over here because this is the start no matter how I look at it. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. What's so interesting, like, and I love the way that you just kind of summarized that too, because I think that we believe absolutely the same thing, that the vision is super important. It's interesting because he's got a pretty, I think, interesting story about, you know, placing a vision on what he wants the future to be and then finding a way to get it. But what's so interesting, I think, about, you know, that entire story is you have so many moments throughout your journey where it's filled with, you know, these I guess it's these decisions, right? These decisions that you have to make, and that you're also flexible enough to make, to go off in different directions. Like, oh, I'm a promoter now, right? Like, it's just like in those moments, it's like you believe that you're making the right choice, but then you make that choice in that moment, and you're off. And there's so many moments like that. But the one that stands out the most is that one where you're like, you had these convictions. It was like, no, I think it needs to be set up right here, right at Twilight, right? And like you were so in that conviction, right? You believed in it so much that you actually left, right? And everything that happened after that, like this thing, whatever you were holding on to, right, was so important to you. I think because of your vision, right? Like you have this longer vision that you're okay leaving, but that's what actually brought you back too at the same time. And I think it's all of that. It was within, like, that's, I think, part of who you are. And I think it's as much as it's like, I met the right person at the right time and that built and built and built. I think it's like there's something deep within you, right? That just, it's that conviction to be able to make these decisions in the moment and stand up to, I think, the vision that you're holding of what you want to do in the future, right? That you can walk off stage and just drive away, and then they eventually just want you back, and they want you back.
And you have to have the ability to see it and say, no, this is where I have to go. Yeah. Like, no matter, there's failure everywhere. I could walk 2 steps and fall from here and break something. And so failures, I'm surrounded by it. Yeah. So no matter what I do, I'm going to fail. So if in my brain, it's not a delusion, because we all have delusions, and I'm very clear on my delusions, so I don't ever put that as like my starting base. My starting base is the truth. The truth, what does the truth look like? And if I could see the truth, and the truth says, if I put the equipment over here, I'm going to be seen by more eyes, that's where it goes. When I went to Silver, same thing. I was like, DJ booth has to be, it used to be like all the way, like, do you know where the post office is in Park City when you walk up Main Street? Yeah. It's on, so if Silver is like, right, it faces it, right? That little alleyway, it faces it. They used to have the DJ booth in the middle right there. No one could see that. So I asked him, I was like, hey, can we put the DJ booth in the corner window, faces Main Street? People are gonna see the action. I guarantee you we pack this place every weekend. We packed that place for almost 4 years straight.
No way.
No problem, no question. Because there's just so little things that you do that creates the big things. There's a ton of little things that I do all the time. This is something that is probably not big, but I don't know how big it is yet. Yeah. Like, because somebody might listen to this and go, he's more interested in that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or he's actually he's much more put together than I thought. I just thought he was an artist. That's a lot of the misconception. A lot of times with the vision is where we all fail. And that's why I said, you got to put the truth first. Like, let me get to the root first, and then I'll start like putting dirt on it and watering, and I'll do all the stuff, but let me get to the root first and see what's there, and we can build from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned creativity, and I think, absolutely. Like, what's so interesting about that too is the idea of putting this DJ booth facing out of a window, right? Like, I think, there's something to what you're talking about as far as, the root, or even the problem or the opportunity, right? Like, I think as a creative, you probably just look at different opportunities in different ways than I think a lot of other people, right? Like, nobody's going to think to put a DJ booth looking out of a window, right? But you I think have a vision for stuff, and it's ultimately rooted in, like, I think this opportunity for experience, like what's gonna drive the best experience possible.
Because people want what they can't have, or the limited experience. When people go, oh my gosh, I want to go up there, and then they get to the door and they're like, it's a zoo and it's a restaurant. And they go, how? Like, this is impossible. And you go, no, it's not impossible, because you saw it on the street, and that's what drew you here. No one did anything special. It was just enough to make you realize that's something that I gave you what you wanted, but without you even like knowing what you wanted. So a
little bit of curiosity, right? It's like, what's going on in there?
Yeah.
Planted the seed.
And that's what you have to do in all these facets. And we haven't even really talked about music yet. Yeah. So you notice we've talked about everything other than music, because music has nothing to do with like my performance ever. Music has nothing to, like, I love music. I care about music. Music is the best thing that could have ever happened to me, you know, in my life, outside of like having 10 fingers, 10 toes, and I could talk. You know what I mean? Like it's probably the best thing because it's given me a lot. You know, it's made me Fortune's pet and all these things, and it's great. But the reality of it is like when you open up the scope, you don't see music. Mm. And that's the thing, you're not seeing music anymore because every time you hear a song, you indulge in it. It's not the music, it's your feelings. It's all in your feelings, you know? So I create the feelings. I'm here to create a feeling. When I leave here, I want to feel empowered. I want to go do something more special than I've done before. Everything that I do is for that. Music is just my vehicle. Yeah. That's how I get there, you know, but it's not, the driving force is everything that's inside of me, you know? So, and that's what I sell. I sell me. I don't, like, if I sold you music, you wouldn't buy it from me. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, when I sell you me and you're like, I want that. Of course I want that, you know? That's actually interesting. And only because I connect with you, because I feel the pain of life the same way you do. I see the same things and I acknowledge it. And a lot of people that are artists or this and that, and you see them not become anything, is because they don't acknowledge what's happening. You know, it's a question of how much more can I get versus like what's my impact. And I'm all about impact. Like every time I touch the turntables, there's impact. You know, that's not me just playing music. I'm trying to change everything that you felt before you walked in here.
So interesting. So many things you're giving. I'm not sure what to ask next because my head's full. I think that because, you know, I love the story, by the way, about the Swell. I mean, how cool is that? That's one reason why you're here. Second reason you're here is, the fact that the most important thing to you isn't actually the music. It's the feeling.
The emotional impact.
I mean, that's what you're looking for. And I'm curious to know, at what point did you realize that? Was it through music that you realized that was kind of your purpose and your passion to really focus on the feeling? Or was it earlier than music that you realized that was important to you?
I could tell you the rawest thing that I thought just happened in my brain when you asked me. And what happened is every doubt is the feeling. Every pain is the feeling of like, no, you can't do that. Like, that's why I get on stage. I even tell myself, even before I performed yesterday, I was like talking myself out of it because it's such a big deal for me, you know, and that's how I look at it. You know, it's something that makes me go to the turntables because I'm doubting myself, you know. So you're doubting me, go to the turntables. Because I'm a monster on those. I'm gonna teach you exactly how I feel. So it has nothing to do with the music. You see what I'm saying? Like even when of the best players of sport, they don't go out there to score baskets. They go out there for the pressure. They go out there for all the other things that surround them. Family, everything that they're fighting for is on that court. You know? And that's what happens when you're a purist. I'm a purist of my craft, and I've done nothing else, you know, outside of my early days when I worked for my family. So I've never really had a job. I've only ever done music. So when you're a purist at something, your fight is so crazy different. Like I don't even look at the music. I'm like, okay, how am I going to impact this person? How am I going to get this person to get and this person to like each other? And I know at the beginning they don't. But it's the feelings that I got from all those experiences I had. Like, how am I going to make these people like me? How am I going to, like, change the way they see me, you know? And that's music. And that's the relationship I feel versus, like, saying, oh, well, I'm gifted and all this stuff. No, all that took practice.
Yeah. That's interesting. I've got one. I know you've got another question.
Go for it. Yeah.
I'm thinking... So, I mean, I just like the things you were saying around, you know, looking back, you can see where things made sense, right? Certain touch points, certain decisions, certain risks, certain failures even. But you also have this vision looking forward as well. And you've learned over time that actually, if you repeat those, you know, taking risks or repeat following your gut feel, it leads to something good. Maybe it might be 6, 7 years down the line. But I want to just take I've got two things I'm curious about. I'm curious about where music, where that gift of looking for the feeling, it wasn't even music actually, as you said, it was something deeper than music. Where did that come from? Was it instilled, do you think, by family or certain experiences you had when you were a lot younger?
It's such an interesting, I've thought every time I'm asked a question, this question is not for today, which is so great because I'm going to give you an answer. But typically when somebody asks me a question, I know the question is not for today. The question you just asked me is something that I have to think about for a very long time before I know. Like I'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll ask me something and be like, how do you feel about this? And my feeling of it won't even show up till later. So the reality of like how I felt as a kid growing up was my brothers and I, because I'm Jamaican, so I grew up in Jamaica for the first 10 years of my life before I moved to the States. I moved to New Jersey. 17, I moved to Utah. My mom lived in the States. My dad lived in Jamaica, but he traveled because he's an accountant and all these things. So like I've had a good different aspects of the world, I would say. But as a child, we used to, you're English. From London. So dub plates and all that. So as a kid, Jamaicans came up with that. So we used to try to get the dub plates. We'd make the cassettes. He'd have his cassette. I'd have my cassette, and we'd play our dub plates. We'd try to record stuff, and then we'd play each other and have our sound clash, because that was the thing, Kilimanjaro and all those, great Black Chiney and all those great, clashes of, selectors. So that's how I grew up, being such a good selector of music. So if you want to know the root, that's the root, because Jamaicans are pretty much the first DJs, so... And then as that progressed into time and getting a Walkman, I remember my first yellow, the cassette Walkman, a yellow one. And then I got the silver Sony one years later. So I've always listened to music. I'd take it from my sisters and whatnot and gain perspective. I remember first time hearing DMX and going what am I listening to? And he has blood on him on the album cover. I'm this is crazy. And then my mom's listening to Barrington Levy and all these other so I've always had music around me, but what was the driving force that got me to music was just I feel that was my escapism of life around me. And that's what I'm saying. The question is not for today. So I can give you that one answer, and then I could tell you it's escapism because we all go through. I didn't really want to be an accountant, So I was all right, how can I make this job more pleasing? Okay, I can listen to 10 albums a day, which is mathematically 8 hours at the time, So that's how.
I like that. I'm going to ask one follow up to that. I think so. When you're imagining, I've got a friend that, Rob Dryden, who was an architect, and he always said his gift was that he could see, he could walk into a space, could have been where Kiln is, that was not built yet, and he could literally see before his eyes, where the walls would go, where the sofas would go, where the arches would go. He'd just see it in his head, and it was a gift. And then I was thinking, which made me think of that, and then I'm thinking, well, maybe you hear the music. Instead of seeing it, you kind of hear a track. I know that track is going to come next. But I wonder now, based on what you said, it's not about the music, it's about the feeling and the emotion. I wonder whether you feel what needs to come into the room next for your audience. And then immediately think of the track. I don't know.
Interesting. I feel I guess... how I want to break this down, because what you said to me is the gift part. I do have a gift, which is discernment. That's my gift. That's my natural gift. I've always been able to anticipate things. I'm very good at anticipating something that's going to happen next. That's how my brain works. I'm a futurist in that way. Like, I could see down the road, whether it's me or multiple other things, I could see a shift that's happening in an industry really quickly. I identify that. So when you asked that question, you guys sent me that little questionnaire, and I was like, what's like the one thing you wish people knew? And because I'm fascinated more about business than I'm about what, like the side that you're talking about, like do you see it as a gift? But it's the gift has no bearing on one thing. It's like across the board. So I could pick anything. I was going to be good at whatever I chose. It's the intention that I had to be good at music. I wanted to be good. Like I know what a room needs more than anybody, you know, and only because of tons of practice, like constant practice. There's all the talent that I could have in the world, the experience that I have, the true knowledge of reading an audience and like dictating and making them believe that they made those choices is that's a practice skill that no matter if I could give you a laptop, I could say, hey, play these songs in a row, and you will never rock the party the same, because I know exactly when to do it, like what time, when to cut it out. There's so many different nuances when I should just like say something to you or make you say something to get you more engaged. It's all about pushing that level higher, you know, but you only learn that through experience. The talent can only get you so far. You see so many talented people. Why do you think 1% of athletes are going professional in anything? You know, because not many people can go, okay, I'm a pro now, so I got to start thinking like a pro. And this is how a pro thinks. A pro is like, okay, it's not about me anymore. I'm good at what I do, but how do I fit in this system? And how do I make the system work for me? And that's all the great people have that ability. They'll see it, they'll design it, and it's a philosophy from beginning to end. Every show in my brain works the same way. I practice the same way.
I love that. It's deep, that, and I my only comment is or curiosity, and it can come later. Josh has a question.
Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah,
is around how. I mean, the fact is that you're saying it's instinct and it's a gift of discernment, which is awesome. And actually, if you were to do that, watch that in slow motion in your head, you know, you might be looking for that emotion first or the feeling, and then you see the track. But actually, I think what it makes me think of is to go back to, you use the word design, like I know my set, or I know my, what's going to happen. What research and kind of discovery about your audience, what I was impressed with back then was the fact that you went from music from like all types of genres and like way back when, but then you were mixing it with stuff that was current. So how do you if you're going into, I don't know, a certain type of demographic that's that you've never done before, you could probably wing it, maybe, I don't know, because your instinct, or do you spend quite a lot of time actually intentionally looking at the demographic and researching?
Sound analysis is how I trick an audience that I don't know. I analyze the sound. I've done like a Bosnian wedding or something, right? I'll get the music. It'll sound specific to that region, but I could see how the bass lines fundamentally match certain things over here, or like they use a specific melody all the time. Like Bosnian music has a specific melody. So I'm like, okay, you have the specific melody, so I know that you're gonna dance to anything that kind of sounds like this melody. So that's when I start like tricking you. First, I'll go with the sound. I'll find the sound that matches, and then I'll trick you there. And then once I got that done, now I'm gonna bring the words. Now I'm gonna start flowing words that are gonna actually like mesh with what you're trying to tell, the story that you were trying to tell for the day. So now we went from Bosnian music to now we're back into a commercial, probably American or English or whatever music. And you didn't even think about the change because I kept the same identity of what you were looking for. And that's where, like, if I go into any type of situation that if I DJ for like a class of people that are like, oh, we only want jazz music from this era, and I only like Dave Brubeck, and that's my only thing that I've given you. Okay, through experience, I'll go, okay, Dave Brubeck, so that means they like George Benson, and now I've modernized their sound in that instant. Within that instant, I modernized their sound because I got them from this era to another era, but I kept that jazz feeling, and then I could transcend into the future. And then they go, wow, I've never heard that. How did you get me there?
Yeah.
You know? And then I take you all the way back, and that's the dance, and that's what I do every single time. And it changes for whatever I'm doing. It could be conceptually, if I'm working with a guitar player and his strength is just strumming the guitar. Here, I'm gonna take this a cappella. We're gonna work on tempo. First thing, we'll work on tempo. We'll get our tempo right, and then once you feel comfortable, watch me just dance around you. I'm gonna put vocals in, so you'll never have to find a beat because I'll always be on time with you. And that's the relationship, you know?
Love that customization.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording. It's this journey that you take people on. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things that you take away from that. Like the idea of, we talked about this idea of, okay, the entire set, for example, right? From beginning to end, you know, and I love kind of what the takeaway is, at least, you know, where do you start? You start from somewhere familiar to your audience, right? But then the same way, you know, any good story works, like you start somewhere familiar and then you give them a sense of curiosity. You disrupt what they're familiar with and take them into someplace completely new. And if you didn't do that, you know, if you gave them, I just want a whole set of jazz, or I just want a whole set of this, right? Then all of a sudden there's nothing new. There's nothing that's breaking their expectations. There's nothing that's taking them to this new world, or taking them on this journey. Yeah. And that's amazing. I'm really fascinated by that. But so I guess my question is then when you go back to what we were talking about before the podcast, even, you know, what you're doing with your podcast, for example, right? Like, you know, you every month you have a specific theme of kind of what you're looking to put out into the world, I guess, right? As far as the pulse of that.
And I don't talk on it, so I just want to reassure people if they ever listen, I don't talk on the podcast. It's 100% music. Yeah. So it's always conceptually music.
Yeah.
And so I always want to take people on a journey every month of something that, like last year, it was so funny. For December, I did the 60s mix because literally what happened this year happened in my mix. So if you go back to December, and I saw change happening. And literally, if you read the writing that's in the podcast, I talk about, you know, we're in change again. You know, you go through this phase and then you're going through change again. And I could have anticipated the change that was coming. So through the podcast, that's how, you know, that's my breakthrough of showing you, like, I have my pulse, you know, my hand on the pulse of what's going on, but in my own way, you know, through the music. So for what you just asked me, the podcast is my way of showing people my story, but the world's story.
Yeah. And I guess even, so whether it's your podcast or, you know, with the music over the course of the monthly theme, right? This monthly topic that you're exploring, or even, you know, you mentioned that jazz set where you're starting with a place that's familiar, right? But then you're taking them to a new set of sounds, or a new set of artists, or a new set of music, right? But there's still like an underlying musical theme within, I think that's what you were talking about, is like from where they're familiar, you're still bringing a sense of familiarity through that, even though you're taking them to this new world, right? And I think that's where what's really interesting to me is like when you take, you know, one thing and then you mash it up with another thing, right? And ultimately, through that journey, you're ultimately creating this new feeling that never existed without the combination of the two things, right? I don't know, but there's not really a question there, so I don't know what.
I feel how I feel about it is like when you give somebody a product that's yours, right? Whether it's the podcast or like a live performance, you know, and like creating, you know, that familiarity or like all these effects of what they want, but through me, and then adding the concept of like let's mash up this and this and it's going to sound cool to you, or yada yada yada. My thing is like, I'm not trying to change your music taste. Like I'm not, my job is not to change any type of like vision that you saw of the world. What I'm in this moment, I'm showing you the difference. You know, I can only give you a window into what you really want. It's for you to choose it. Like you know what I mean? There's a lot of people that are never gonna hear a certain type of music just because they don't want to even open the door to that. You know what I mean? So in life, my job is to open the door, and hopefully you'll get it. And if you don't, that's not my job after that. I did everything I could. God put me here to give you this moment, and then you didn't see it. It didn't, like, for you guys, you saw it. You know, whatever you saw something, right? And then we're here now. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's not for me. It's for that person to go home and maybe not commit suicide, you know, or it's for that person to go home and go, I was going to quit my job, but something in that music told me to hold on, you know? So that is what my message is. My message is like, how is it going to make you feel stronger? Yeah. You know, or how is it going to make you more aware? You know, so all the things that, like I said, all the things that we talk about that are the music is, we write music. It's a story. All these things are stories. I've created a melody. It's a story. You know, every melody there's a word behind it. Somebody's humming something, you hear a bird. So the bird was singing, you just stole it from the bird. You just don't know you stole it from the bird. You know? But he was talking. It's just not the same words, you know? So you have to kind of look at it from that perspective, that you're giving a part of you away every time. It's like when Kobe Bryant died for me, like a part of me died. Yeah. You know, even though it was like I was just a fan, but I remember sitting at a game when I was like 16 years old, and he came over after he beat the Jazz, and he took his armband off and he gave it to me. No way. Yeah. And it's in my office. Yeah. You know, and it's like one of those things where it doesn't matter how many jump shots he made, that is the moment, you know? And so something for someone is just a moment. So you have to be very like mindful of it's not these tools that you have to, it's this sound and that sound, and that's why people like connect with you. It's this thing. So I'm really interested in this. So, I mean, personally, like, so I'll just talk about Kobe Bryant for a second, right? But like, I mean, I grew up a huge fan of the Utah Jazz, right? And, you know, I remember watching when Michael Jordan hit his shot, you know, over Brian Russell, right? Mm-hmm. And then I remember, you know, after that era, then, you know, of course, the Kobe Bryant era, where I just remember rooting so hard against Kobe Bryant. Yeah. But it, like, I mean, there was something to that, and it hit me really hard too, right? Like when he died, and I was like, it's just the greatness that he had in him, right? And because he made you feel something. Exactly. And what I want to get into then, because it's interesting when I think about DJing, I think, you know, well, there's the music, and then there's the individual behind, you know, the person bringing this experience, and for an artist, you know, there's always this balance between, you know, your personal voice and what you think the audience is trying to. Well, ultimately what the audience wants. And I think what you're balancing on right now in what you just mentioned is like, you know, it's as much as important as the artist and their personal voice, or the experiences that got them to this moment that's informing maybe it's your intuition for the next song, right? You know, that discernment. But at the same time, it feels like you're constantly balancing that. But I'm definitely interested in your perspective even a little bit more on your own personal voice and that, you know, your ability as a DJ, you know, and the importance of, I guess if I relate it back to, like, it's almost like, well, what makes you a pro DJ, right? And it's that unique voice, right? I don't know. What makes me a professional? Of course, there's a laundry list now, but a true pro is in anything, especially what I do, is you hire me for a task, and I do that above and beyond your expectation. That's my job. You know, that's when you're a professional. If I can identify what you want and deliver the service, I'm a professional. So like what I am, like at this point, I'm a business owner. I own a business. I've scaled it into multiple DJs, and it's not just me. So from the beginning, I jumped in. So I would say that's professional. You know, other people could say, oh, I went to Juilliard, or I went to here, and then I got into music, and I'm an engineer. And it's like, yeah, that's a different way of doing it. It's the same thing, and you're a professional. Over time, you're a professional, but a long-winded reason why I'm a professional is because all I do is work for the biggest corporations in the world. I
think that's perfect.
That's the only. And if I were to sum it up to anybody else that's doing anything that's not that, you're not a pro. You do it for a hobby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you're not doing it 24/7, you do it for a hobby.
Yeah. No, I get that, and I think even just to go, I guess, a little bit deeper, because let's say somebody had a similar journey. Like I'm still interested, I guess, in your voice as an artist, right? I think because
that's the second question.
Yeah. So your voice as an artist, I guess, in relationship to, I think, like, because there's something that you bring that's unique. Like you can't just give the audience, I think, exactly what they want, right? Like there are the things that make you who you are. If you put another great DJ in the same set, there's going to be something completely different. But I guess if I was to relate to it, right? Like, it's like,
say the first part again.
Yeah.
Say that first part.
I think what you'll find with artists is, or even entrepreneurs, right? Maybe this is a good way to talk about it as well. Is, there's definitely personal passions, there's personal interests, there's life events that have shaped you as an individual that got you to where you are, at this specific moment. And that, I think, when you come to understand yourself on a deep enough level, you find, I think, your personal voice, right? You find your voice as an artist. Like for me, like I could say, as a storyteller, I'm really passionate about specific stories, but and it's those specific stories that I'm really interested in telling, right? Maybe it's based off of a specific genre, but my voice lies somewhere in these kinds of stories, right? And I guess kind of, if I was to relate it back to you, then, like, you have such a broad and eclectic, a selection of music, right? And I think it's like, I guess it goes back to, how do you weigh your voice as an artist, like what you believe is the right thing versus what you think the audience wants or what you think the audience needs in a specific moment. So like there's a balance between your voice and the audience's voice of kind of what needs to happen right now. Does that make sense? It's a tough question. But
I'm gonna relate it to British royalty. They are very pragmatic people.
Yeah.
And when you're pragmatic, you make the right decision because it's the best decision for the moment. It has nothing to do with your personal interest. Mm-hmm. So my voice is, in a sense, pragmatic. I won't just go out there and give my advice because no one is asking for it, but when you're, it's always, my life is always in the story because I created it. So no matter if I even like mow my lawn, that's me. I did that, so that's a part of my creation. At that point, I get to enjoy that creation for the better part of a week before I have to start the process over again. So anything that you touch, technically, it's going to have you in it, so I can't create anything without having a piece of me in it. Is it going to tell my story at that specific time? Sometimes it might. Other times I want to tell a different story that I see, that I feel like that this story is bigger than my story. Other times my story might be the biggest part of the story, and that's what people latch onto. I relate it to when I create tricks, because I create a lot of tricks. You were asking me for my IP. That's my IP. My intellectual property. Yeah, I'm a good-looking guy, sure, but the reality of it is my IP is making signature tricks that nobody else can do. Because yes, I have the ear for it, but I'm practical enough to say, just because I don't like that song doesn't mean it doesn't go with the song.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I make the master trick, and that's my whole. That's where my bread and butter is. And people can try to create tricks. It's extremely difficult.
I think you were able to answer my question without actually me asking a good question, because like I think that's the root of it, right? Like, what was your stamp, or what is it that makes a set, you know, DJ Dolph? And I think that's really interesting. I appreciate you dealing with my rambling of trying to find the right question.
You totally had it. That's why I asked you again, because I wanted to process it, you know, in the way where I was like, okay, I see what your perspective, because you're talking about something that you're unfamiliar with. So you're asking me things that are so far in the back of my mind that for me to even remember that, like, that tricks for me are like, I do that, you know? So it's not like, but it's important. Like, that's my intellectual property. That's where every person that's ever heard me, they heard a mix that was like mind blowing. Yeah. Because it blew my mind. The best part about what I do is when I go to the turntables, and because practicing for me, I practice because I have to. I used to practice because I loved it. You know, now I practice because I have to. I go down there, but when I go down there, the one thing that gets me to love DJing every single time is when I put a trick together and it gives me the chills, and I go, this is going to give people chills for years. And that's it. Because I know once I come up with a good trick, it's over. I know. It's like, I don't even have to. It could be the only trick I did all night, but it's just like when Tony Hawk came up with like he was the first person to do like the 900. Yeah, he was the first person. So being able to do that was his ticket, you know? So my ticket is the tricks, and I'm a novelty product. I'm not the product. I've never looked at myself as a product that I'm going to go out there and I'm going to solicit. I don't want to be on every single billboard. I want to be like every other, like, well-off person that is successful. You know a little about them, but the image alone is terrifyingly awesome. And that's it. Because you're like, I don't want to mess anything up when this person's around. But you love the person because you're like, I look up to that. You know, I want to be a part of that. So that's all people I look up to are like that.
Yeah.
I liked, going back to the piece around, you know, you got an ear for music. Just to reiterate, it's not just an ear for music, right? It's IQ. Like, you've got emotional intelligence, the focus on the feeling. And, you know, that's what you...
Funny enough, I did just take the IQ test, like, not too long ago, and I scored really high in emotional intelligence. Yeah, so...
That's great.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can tell you what I got on the test. I got 122 out of the 144 or above or whatever. So I'm above average thinker. I wanted to take it. I always wanted to take it, so I did. You know, so.
That's a good score.
Yeah. So I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Well, did you have a question with that? Because I think it's along those lines, right? Because I think that I did want to go into the emotional bit, right? Like, if you talk about those tricks, right? Those moments that give you the chills, right? Mm-hmm. Have you had those moments when, like, you're like, this is gonna hit, right? This is gonna be good, and then the audience, or like, it just doesn't, like, have you had those moments where the audience just doesn't connect with it the way that you expected? Like, maybe
I wouldn't give it to you because I know, you know, it's not. It's just like how does a quarterback like throw a ball so perfectly in between a seam and, like, you know, or a golfer make a perfect shot, or any type of thing. It's a visualization. You see the end product. You're visualizing it before it happens. And can I anticipate something wrong? Sure. But when it comes to something that you're extremely good at, you never question that. That's the only thing that you have. Bend it like Beckham. I give all these references because these are the things that make people who they are. Yeah. There's no reason why certain people are who, you know what I mean? There's a specific thing that they do. They're not. I've never met anybody that's good at everything. Never. I've met incredibly smart people, but they do one specific thing extremely well, and then they either build a team around them to do all the other things, or they're so good at this one thing that they never have to do anything else, you know? So that's I think that's what I've, like, kind of, like, noticed in my, like, experience. So
Yeah, I like it. It makes me want to ask you a question, Josh.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, at some point, I do want to ask, like, your favorite DJs, your favorite number one, like what you're listening to now, stuff like that. We could come back to that. Maybe this is the point where we choose avenues. The other, thing we could go down is, like, I mean, how, you've done a lot of work with story, and also visual, design.
Filmmaking and
do you see those things in your mind's eye before you've even designed them? Anyway, we don't have to go down that avenue, but it made me think of it.
Yeah, well, I think, from a story perspective, right, and I think a film perspective even, like the general consensus is that you start from a place that's familiar or a place that has some sort of status quo, and it's the moments of conflict and the moments of transformation. Like I could say it's your tricks, right? It's the moment when you switch from the known to the unknown that you find a new feeling, a new transformation, or an emotional evolution through a piece of story or through a piece of film or through a piece of a set, right? And so that's kind of, as far as like, seeing it, I don't know. I think sometimes there's the intuition, but that's kind of, I think, going back to your voice and it's going back to, what's the most interesting choice that I would want to make right now if I'm thinking about it from a story perspective? Like, what's the most interesting thing for me right now? But, I would also argue that you have to be thinking about the audience at the same time. So I guess, I don't know. It's always a tough tightrope balance. It's like, well, this is kind of what I was getting at, with the voice question is like, this is what I would want to see happen in a story, right? And I'm super passionate about this, but then, maybe there's not an audience for that kind of a story, right?
Got you.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I also, what made me think of as well was challenging the status quo. I mean, this is what you're doing, and this is what we do, where we create new things that didn't exist before to challenge and to move forward. And I think what I've loved both of you have said though is this familiar, like making sure it's something familiar with something new.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's really important in the journeys and experiences that we design, to have the familiarity there. So that people can, feel comfortable, but then something unexpected, something new to challenge them and to really continue their momentum.
A good example of this is actually, so we haven't talked to him yet, but Gil, who is going to be on the podcast, I'm not sure how these episodes are going to be released. So if you've already, the thing is like if you go and listen to Gil's episode right after you hear this, but so Gil, for example, right. He worked at Pluralsight, but right now he just opened this new, it's like an art studio and clothing line called Microwave. And if you go and look at some of his clothing, like he has these hoodies with pictures of the Mona Lisa on them, or pictures of, The Farmer's Wife? I can't remember if that's the name of that piece. But so, for instance, the Mona Lisa, you can picture it. And over the face, he takes like, it looks as if it was like a piece of colored paper, right? And it basically cut out in the form of like a multi-point star, and then he puts little eyeballs on it. And he puts that over the face of Mona Lisa, right? And it's this mishmash of what people are familiar with in the idea of Mona Lisa, but what does it actually say about the piece as a whole? Like this piece of art that's now on your shirt that now is, the face is obstructed and it's now covered by, what looks like this star with eyeballs on it, right? Like there's something really interesting about that.
It's the abstract.
Yeah.
It's the abstract. It's taking what you've seen normally and flipping it upside down and saying this is new. And it's like, is it? But it's your spin on it to build the new thing and make people believe that it's new. So it's not just like, oh, well, I'm going to do something creative. It's the belief after to, the people that are truly like, I guess the visionaries, it's like the conviction after the belief that this is going to be different. Even though I've seen a million shirts that have taken like great art and, fabricated a new idea, on it. he's doing something different, but in his belief, I left this corporation. How do you leave a corporation and be an art guy? You know what I mean? It's like the world is littered with bad artists, you know, or trying artists, or people that are never make it in art. And there's people that are like, let's say, I just watched Miles Davis's documentary. Insanely crazy great jazz, unbelievable, next level, reads music, writes music, went to Juilliard, brilliance, to where he was so upset when rock and funk started coming out and becoming the music of the day. He was like, these guys can't even read or write music, and people like this, and they're selling out concert. I'm gonna go do this, and I'm gonna do it better. And he did. And when he got to a certain place, he did the same thing that you said, Gil.
Yeah, Gil.
He started creating art. He got to a place, and you see it happen. Like, what's his name? Does it too now? The crazy actor guy. I forget. Ace Ventura guy.
Oh yeah.
So he's an artist now, and so you have people like that. And this is a long-winded way of saying, like, there's so many littered streets of artists that are out there. And then you have people that are already successful, and they'll choose something else, and they'll be great at it because the belief is that they already made something successful. So it's all about belief. So if I have a belief that this is a great product, no matter what anybody tells me, other than obvious feedback that tells me nobody wants this product, you know, like if I could create enough belief behind it and people start believing, that's why you see cults. That's why you see all these things. You just have to build up belief. It doesn't have to be crazy. The product doesn't have to be crazy. It just has to be the sticker, but then have belief. And then people cling. And that's the thing. You'll find an audience for it, you know?
Yeah.
Quick, rapid questions. Let's think. I wanted to know if you've had a fail.
Fail?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like in relation to kind of a big event, a big
I've been
evening.
audited by the IRS. you want to hear? I'll give you real stories.
But musically, like kind of emotionally, like have you got it wrong, and why? And
a big moment of fail, never. Not professionally. I've had moments where it could happen, but I'm experienced, so there's fail safes in place and all kinds of little mechanisms. My voice is a tool. The turntable's a tool. My laptop's, my phone's a tool. So there's many ways of audibling out of a really dire circumstance professionally. So there's no true emergency.
What's so continuing on with the rapid fire? What's your favorite song right now? What are you into?
Favorite song right now. Okay, so tough question, but I'll just go with. I won't even go with the song. I'm only listening to Miles Davis right now, so
really?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I was gonna pick "Loving Is Easy" because it's such a good. It's 3 years old, but it's becoming a popular record. So I like the fun. I like a fun song, but I like jazz music. Like if you've noticed, like I focus really heavy on jazz because conceptually, there's no better music.
How about you, Josh?
Favorite song? I don't like that question.
You asked the question.
I know, because I'm interested to see how you would respond to that. But it's so tough.
Don't ask me it.
Okay,
No, I don't want to ask.
What's your favorite song right now?
But yeah, I don't know. Do you know what time we're at? Are we?
I think we're nearing.
We're close.
Yeah,
we've got
close.
like 5 minutes.
Yeah. I was interested in the fail question as well. I thought that was something that's interesting. Earlier on, you said the lab. Is that kind of you mentioned like you go away to the lab?
That's
what you call when you're experimenting.
My
and putting
office
together.
in my house is the lab.
Yeah.
It's because it's the lighting's different. It's set mood lighting in there. It's
made for experimentation.
And my workout. I work out in the same room I make music in because I fight for it. I look at the turntables it's a war.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's different. It's like the competition isn't. I'm not in a competition with a lot of people, but I'm in competition with myself to strive for better things and to be able to do that, I got to go to war in that lab. I
like that.
So are you going to war with anything in the lab right now, or like, is there anything that you're experimenting with or exploring right now?
Right now, the transition for me is mainly like, virtual. It's like, I wasn't one of those people that jumped online and was like doing all that stuff. I'm so patient when it comes to business, where it's like, I know where I'm at to where the business is coming to me. So the virtual business came to me, all the big virtual stuff. I knew it was going to come. So like for me, like you can't, I have an idea of the future, but how to get there is not up to me, so I can't say like, oh, I had vision virtual. None of us did. So now we're here, and now everybody works from home. And so we're living this new life. So my thing is always looking for, how do I navigate this new thing? When I was 13 years old, I remember my dad sat me and my brother down. My brother went to school in London for accounting. And so he sat us down, and he's having this really deep conversation with me and my brother, because like, he's like, at some point you guys are going to be running this thing and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, I don't know anything that you're saying. But one thing I did remember from this conversation, he goes, forensic accounting is going to be the most important thing in the next 5 years. And literally 3 years later, the whole economy of the world crashed, because, my dad coming from the accounting side, they knew exactly what was going on. Like, they're involved in all these companies. They see like the processing system of a bank is running inefficiently to where no one knows where the money is at any given time. So they had to become more efficient to where we are today, where you're instantaneous banking. That's what you have today. Back in 2005, you didn't have that. Can you imagine that? In 2005, you didn't have that. Yeah. And you would think you were already in the future. 15 years ago, you didn't have that. And he said, within 5 years, this is all going to change. So from that moment, and I watched it happen because I started my career right around that time when everything fell apart in the world. And ever since that, I've always looked ahead every single time, because there's an answer there. You just have to see it and adapt before it changes, and that's where I'm at with business.
Yeah. So looking ahead, just tell us a little bit how you have adapted for virtual.
Yeah, I would.
Like, how does it actually work? Because we've been involved in all sorts of experiences and change journeys that have these experiences that about music, and actually now it has to be done virtually. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
So I'm going to give you 2 examples of things that have happened to me prior to this that were like huge events. You asked me what huge events were. Being audited because you play music and you make a lot of money is a crazy thing. For a government to just show up and say, hey, you're making a lot of money. We need to look at everything that you do. How are you making music? And then when you peel the layers back, they're like, oh, this is a new thing. Because even for them, seeing like what we became, that doesn't make sense. They're like, what? You play music for people, but you're not an actual musician? So it's like, so for starting there, that was a huge obstacle, because that flipped my life upside down, going into those meetings for months and months, and them digging up your life to make sure that you're doing all the right things. That was like a true eye-opener of like, no matter how successful you are, you work for a system. And a system, you could be crushing it, and the system will come in and tell you exactly what's next for you. And so that was one of the moments where I go, okay, I'm shoring up my accounting team. Like insane accounting, like, because my dad and those things couldn't do like accounting here, so you have to get like a good group of people. So I went down on Broadway, got the best that money could buy, because if you're gonna grow a business, work with the best. That's my philosophy. If you're the best videographer and I find that out, I'll only work with you, because I know that's the vision of the future, because those are people that are on the pulse. So moving forward, after I go through that experience, career keeps going upward trajectory or whatever, and then I noticed that, okay, the club business is not a good long-term scheme, and I'm noticing this at 23, and so I've already been in the restaurant, so I'm like, okay, my heavy focus is to transition to corporate events and special events, so immediately start transferring my business to that way, take less of this, focus on more of that. As time progresses, 2017, now I have to get out of the restaurant business because now we're getting into a saturated market, because you create an idea, people are going to come about and saturate it. So every step of the way, I had to look at the system and say, okay, well, I make this much doing this. I'm going to charge 10 times as much now just so I can exclusively do this. So you have to make big jumps and say, this is who I am now, and it's an exclusive product. And that's the reality of it. So every step of the way, I have to make the adjustment based on what I foresee. When this virtual thing happened, the first thing that I did versus what I've watched the market do, the first thing everybody did, they hopped online. They started doing the virtuals for free and just trying to like get out there and like do something, and quote unquote, everybody's in it together, blah, 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 blah. Not true, but yes. So what I did was, the first thing I did, I went to ASCAP. I made sure I got all the licensing for all of those type of things, because that's the business. The business is having the tools that are gonna, if there's trouble down the road, it's not gonna find me first, you know, because I'm building the infrastructure. Whereas everybody else is just trying to go out there and do the thing. I'm building the infrastructure first. So I built the infrastructure, and then I focus on the clientele, because now I'm doing all these virtual projects because I have all the tools, you know. So you have to get all the right tools to get to a certain level, or like see a big shift or change. So those are the things that I see coming that people don't see, are those little things. Like, you need this, but people don't look at that, you know. Like when this whole thing happened, I'm in the Park City Chamber. How many DJs are in a chamber? Like, nobody. Like, but I'm a business person. DJing is a business for me, you know? So I look at it truly as a business. So I've been in the chamber for years and years, and through the chamber, my business got protected through this whole experience, not even through PPP. They have EIDLs and all these other SBAs and all these other things that people aren't aware of, because they don't see the future. And they don't look down the road and say, these are the avenues to protect or grow. They never do. They just want to do the thing. But the thing is structured around all these other things. And to be successful, that's what you need. That's been my like true big thing every time, is how do I make my business more secure, and that's it.
That's good.
How do those events? I know we're wrapping up now. How do the actual events work?
Oh yeah.
Like I mean,
Let's do the fun stuff.
Is there atmosphere? How?
So typically, I've had a few, so different. So it's all different experiences. Some could be where it's like the one I did for Pluralsight Live this year, it was just me. So we're in the web production house. It's up by the airport. They build a huge set, and it looks like you're playing a festival show, but with all the graphics and everything around you, and they make it look spectacular, and you just do your thing. And, you know, you're not connecting with anybody, but the challenge for me is acting. You become an actor, because like on stage, you have so much going on that even if I'm in the vibe and I'm having a great time, there's so much going on that you're not 100% on me. You think you are, but you're not. When now virtually, it is 100% connection, to where I have to grab you from go, to where I'm looking through the lens into your heart to keep you on that screen, to keep eyes on the screen. So my job is to then go in the lab and then act it out. Every single thing I act out. Every motion, every mix motion, every nuance in even my hand gestures are acted out. Yeah.
Can you see people? Can you see anyone?
No,
so you couldn't read the audience. You just had to rely on what it did for you.
And so I create that. So that's what I'm saying. I create those little gestures.
Hard though, huh?
It's crazy. It's nothing that anybody could prepare you for, because when you when you're put in front of a camera and you have to act naturally, but on top of acting naturally, you have to convey a story, you know, because you're in that world where it's like, if I have to give you a story on top of like being comfortable and confident, that's a whole different ball game. It's not like if you have people in front of you, you can feed off the energy. So I have to create this illusion that everything's there and make it happen. So it's a whole different perspective.
I wonder whether, in the future, it'd be interesting to see what you're going to do in the future with respects to, would you introduce technology into your business, or are you interested in running a different business in the future? This is not really for the podcast, but if you look at the Peloton business model, is there an opportunity to have like live, musical experiences with DJs and music and dancing that's much more connected from a virtual and a global perspective. I don't know if you ever used a Peloton before.
I think it's there. I haven't used a Peloton bike, but that system is definitely there. They do have like a variation of it, but it's more audible than like the visual aspect of it. I know that Las Vegas has they've created like the kiosk DJ now, where they pay for the set from the DJ, they record it, send it to them, and they're selling the boxes to like Vegas places and casinos or whatnot. So there are going to be like implementations of new ideas. How I see like where this is going to go, I will have to table my response for the reality is that there's not going to be a lot of people like me that are left, but there's a reason for that, because you have to, the system weeds out the people that don't belong in the system. And so to create something new from right here, for me, I had a very good idea that we had to like put on hold once the coronavirus happened. And I think it's a great product for it in the future. And I'm a visionary, so I'm sure you guys have picked this up by now. So it's for me, it's like the people telegraph what they want. If you don't get it right then and there, everybody's like, I should have bought Tesla, I should have did this, and we all stand right at the same table. They tell us for years, and no one ever does it or like picks up on it. So you have to. Everything is telegraphed. So my greatest idea might even be right here. I just didn't see it yet, So I have to that's why I said I always try to listen to something and then I'll wait till later.
So watch this space. We'll have to hear in the next few years what do you get up to with.
I'm excited to do that again. Yeah.
This has been great. Well, thank you for being a part of it. Sorry, did you have another question, Josh?
No, I do, but I'm gonna hold off.
Time is run out.
It's so crazy how quickly time goes. I can't.
But seriously, it was really cool. I think there's a lot of parallels that I think will be interesting to explore. I've seen from chatting with you to some of our other guests as well, and I think hopefully people enjoy listening to it. But yeah,
that's my final question. What is the parallel that you drew? What did you guys pick up from? Because you've done a few. So what is like the thread for that?
A good one that I keep seeing is this idea of, I guess you can say, it's definitely a combination of maybe two familiar things that lead to something new, some sort of emotional connection. Like, for instance, we talked with Nate Walkingshaw, and he talks about being deliberate with how he spends his time. And then I think we talked about, the moments when, maybe you're an entrepreneur or maybe you're a father, maybe those two things come together, and he talked about, the future of like kinetic architecture, because he's thinking about how students go to, where they live when they go to school and stuff like that. And it's this mishmash of different things at different times that come together for a new innovation, a new thing, a new feeling, and I think so. Like, there's those parallels.
So you're seeing optimism. There's a lot of optimism about what is possible.
Generally, I think everybody that we've talked to seems very, very optimistic right now. I mean, all of our maybe that's the culture of what we're doing here. Maybe, generally that's just what we're doing. It's just an optimistic podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, we're picking people that are great as well.
Very talented and doing cool stuff.
But and it's less about I suppose the impact of this year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more about how they're adapting just to what they're going to do in the future, right? I mean, when we talk to Gil, I mean, that's about merging the things he loves together with his family, what he loves. And Matt, when we talked to Matt Levitt, I mean, looking at things from the past, and you mentioned the connections from past things and future things, and he is a pathologist who's trying to change the world in digital pathology. Looked at a business model that his family built 50 years, 60 years ago, and realized that would help him with something he's going to build in the next 30 years. So, we're seeing that as the interviews, we're seeing those connections like light bulbs and just the connective tissue between everything, really, about how do you drive change, how do you influence change, how do you create a swelling motion of motivation amongst individuals and people, and hopefully things that will change the world as well. But from your podcast, just even the music, from a musical point, the intentionality, the reading the audience, all of that is really important in the journeys of change that we get ourselves involved in, as individuals in the work that we do. So that's what that's why we find it fascinating just to listen to your expertise in this one area. It actually applies in so many other areas, not just music, but the way you approach it, the way you think about it,
mindset to it.
Because a lot of people are more on the artist side. I've always found, like, in my world, like, I'm more on the business side, and I'm practical, and like I'm so focused on like how to do the business right. And there's a lot of people that are like, I want to be a great artist, and I just want to be that type of person. And it's so interesting for me because I'm like, you can be a great artist, but unfortunately, if you don't have the right person next to you and you're just a great artist, you're nobody. And so the thing is, like, I realized, like, to be a good cerebral person, I have to be good at all these other areas of like my life that I probably would have done naturally if I never went into music. But because I went into music, it made me emphasize those skills more, because I don't think I would have made it without those skills. And I think that was like the biggest thing for me, is like, and I feel like when I tell people stories or like give them like a window into my life, that's the one part that I always go back to. People are so focused on like what the music does for them that I feel like people really overlook how we got there, because people don't get me without the business, because if I wasn't good at business, I would have never made it.
Love it. I think that's about it. Before we finish, tell us how people can contact you.
Oh, well, just DJ Dolph, DOLPH.com, or on Instagram. I don't really use social media that much, or the podcast, The Dolph Experience, and that's where you can find me. Or I'm sure you'll see me live in 2021. That's where you'll find me.
We hope so.
Yeah, we do.
Come to a TV screen.
We want the invite. We want to do a bit of partying.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to do some fun ones next year. I can't wait.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you very much.
That's a wrap.
Sir.
Thanks for hanging out with us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Swell Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, sign up to our newsletter at theswellpod.com, and get in on the conversation through all major socials at The Swell Pod. We'll see you next time.